Hi guys, and welcome back to Is It Worth It Reviews. Today we are going to talk about EarMen L-amp. And this is a throwback to the retro sound, tube sound that I think many of you will really like. So here we have a small desktop DAC and a headphone amplifier. It's very similar in size to the Chord Mojo 2 that you already know. It's slightly bigger when you look from the top, but not as thick and not as weighty as Mojo 2. Anyway, what we get here is a straightforward DAC with two USB-C inputs on one side. One is for data and powering the device, so if you connect it to your desktop, it will be powered with the same cable that carries the data. But if you connect it to your phone and you maybe want to save battery, there is additional external power supply connector, USB-C. So you can power it separately from this data connection. On the other side, we have two analog outputs. One is single-ended 3.5 millimeters. The other one is balanced 4.4 millimeters. And as you can see, this is not really that small and that ultra-portable device like some DAC dongles, so it has a reasonable amount of power. And it's around 560 milliwatts, I believe, at its balanced output, and 230 milliwatts on the single-ended output. So yeah, the balanced one is quite a bit more powerful and it does sound better. And in cases like this, I always say utilize balanced output if you can. And even if you don't have the particular cable, but your headphones or earphones have detachable cable, buy balanced one and utilize balanced output on the DACs like this one, because you will notice the increase in overall performance, power and dynamics. But more on that later. For now, probably the most interesting thing about this DAC is that this is a tube DAC. There is a small window here and you can see two small tubes. They are JAN6418 military grade tubes. And that is important for the final sound signature and sound character of this DAC. But once again, we'll talk about that just a bit later. For now, I wanted to say that while it's working, it doesn't really get all that warm at all, because one might wonder if it has tubes and it's so slim, does it get hot? It's barely any warmer than anything in my home that is not powered by anything, so that's good. Aside from the tubes, what else? The DAC chip itself is coming from Sabre. The manufacturer, EarMen, doesn't say which kind of Sabre chip, and I didn't bother to ask because it doesn't really matter. It really doesn't. I heard devices with really old chips that sound fantastic. I heard devices with the latest, most modern flagship DACs, DAC chips themselves, but they are not that good when it comes to sound quality. So what we do know is that it is a Sabre chip and we have tubes in the output stage. Now controls. We do have volume buttons on one side and also IEM switch. So if you are using highly sensitive IEMs, you can turn that switch on and the background hiss will decrease. On the other side, play pause button and bass plus button. Now this bass plus button works as you would expect. It adds a bit of bass and warmth and oomph in that lower section region. With some headphones that sounds really nice and very pleasant, and I actually used it quite a lot. For example, with AKG K702, which are really open and detailed sounding headphones, but they do not have much of a bass. Bass button in that case is a lifesaver. It makes those kind of headphones much more pleasant and listenable in my opinion. On the other side, if you have already bass healthy headphones, you don't really need this, unless you want to have lots and lots of bass. I won't judge. But even without that bass plus, with a well-balanced headphones, the L-amp already sounds very full and well-balanced. It's not something that you need to use to get to a healthy, weighty tonality. So talking about tonality, we have warm very fluid, very natural tone coming from this DAC. And that's the first thing that struck me immediately after I started testing it. So there is no harsh and edgy bone anywhere in this device. It has just super natural, liquidy smooth flow of tones, and that goes from the bass line all the way to the highest frequencies. And that was something that really amazed me. So when high frequencies have that great natural smoothness and liquidity, they sound very radiant and present, but never edgy and never harsh. And that is really a trait that only best DACs and amps on the market can achieve. And probably the most affordable way to hear that kind of quality is to have an OTL tube amplifier, for example. If you ever had and listened to one of those OTL tube amps, you know what I'm talking about. That said, the logical thing to ask next would be, but does it sacrifice detailing? Does it smooth over quick transients and tone textures? Is it just too warm and gooey sounding DAC? Well, it's not. It achieves, to my ears, fantastic balance between smoothness and liquidity of tones and being revealing and precise on the other hand. So if I listen to something like quick string work on a guitar, I never feel that this DAC is lagging, that it's too slow, and the same goes for all other transients. It manages to have very clean and well-defined, crispy edges and a fast high-frequency detailing, but at the same time it presents them in a liquidy, smooth way that is just so pleasant and good to listen to. If we are talking about an acoustic recording, the sensation of just space and reverbs in that space, tone decays after the main tone strikes, and then we have that aftertone, that slow decay that is giving good, reverberant, realistic feeling to everything. And in reality, you hear that very, very often. It's just the normal part of nature. If you listen to a friend play on an acoustic guitar, the moment he plucks a string, you'll hear for a long time after that natural tone decay and resonances of the guitar chamber and guitar body, and it gives really natural sound to everything in reality. When it comes to recordings and modern equipment that often tends to sound very revealing but somewhat analytical and dry, most of those decays and reverbs will sound slightly shorter and a bit less natural than what we are used to in reality. And on that front, L-amp is doing a great job at sounding perfectly natural and perfectly smooth with great tone decays. Does that ever feel too smooth or too warm? No, not at all, at least to my ears. It just feels very natural. I think that we tend to call this kind of sound warmer because we take everything that is on the market and then the average is considered to be neutral. But what most people say is a neutral sound, to my ears actually sounds drier and more analytical than the reality itself. But it's accepted for that to be called neutral, so here we go, we call it like that. I do that too. But this one that I know most of you would perceive as a warmer sound actually sounds more realistic and more lifelike to me than those devices like RME DACs and topping DACs that we tend to call neutral. So tonality-wise, yes, there is a bit of warmth and tube glow in the sound, but I do think it's perfectly pleasant and makes the sound just more lifelike more than anything else. Also, when it comes to dynamics, this thing has quite a decent amount of power, and especially on the balanced output, as I previously mentioned, you have more power there. It has some pretty decent power handling and grunt. And with most headphones that I tried it with, it can do very lively, snappy, nice, dynamic sounds without any problems. But that leads me to few comparisons. Now, I first tried some small DAC dongles like hibis, hidizis, etc., and there's just no comparison. This sounds so much better that I don't even want to include something like that in this comparison. So something that actually has a chance against L-amp is, for example, Chord Mojo 2. So this is $650 US, I believe. At the moment it was $750 when it was released, but the price lowered, so $250 US pricier than L-amp, and it doesn't sound as good. First of all, Mojo 2 sounds a bit rougher and a bit grainier. It doesn't have this liquidy smooth, just with great glow and natural feel tube sound that L-amp has. Even though the Mojo 2 itself is warm in a way that it has warmish mid-bass and slightly warmer lower mid-range, the upper frequency smoothness is just not comparable to this super liquidy smooth L-amp. And L-amp just sounds more natural. It also sounds bigger, like sound stage and reverbs and echoes around you go further away. Highest frequencies have more radiance, more glow, they're more pleasant with L-amp. And while Mojo 2 is not a slouch, by any means, it's actually a great sounding small DAC amp. It costs more, and to my ears, it cannot compare to L-amp. Oh, I'm sorry, if you limit yourself to single-ended output of L-amp, they are quite comparable. This one is smoother and more liquid-like, slightly warmer sounding. Mojo 2 is slightly drier sounding with a bit more mid-range texture, but kinda grainier and grittier. But the moment you move to the balanced output of L-amp, that lifts performance, and Mojo 2 cannot catch it. This one, Mojo 2, only has single-ended output. So if you use them in the best way possible, both of these devices, L-amp outperforms Mojo 2 quite easily to my ears. So next, I pulled some bigger guns, some desktop device like Rose Technics RT500. This one goes for $600 US, but on its headphone output, it outperforms Chord Mojo 2 quite easily. I reviewed this one. It's a really great value device from China, from an unknown brand, but looks great, made really solid, and performs great. So yes, it's pricier, 50% more expensive. It's also bigger, but it performs in the same tier as L-amp. Here we are talking about quite similar tonalities that are on the warmer side and just smoother side of things, never edgy or jarring in any way. And also the detail retrieval level is very comparable, but the biggest difference between these two is that when you listen to highest frequencies, L-amp once again has that very, very naturally smooth tube sound that, I repeat, only OTL tube amps can provide in my experience. And RT5000 is very smooth sounding and very good sounding in high frequency by itself, but it doesn't have that great glow and radiance and just so natural liquidity that L-amp has. And while I say, once again, I consider them to be the same tier when it comes to sound quality, comparing them, I would always go back to L-amp, and I would personally rather listen to my music using this one than RT5000. And that was for me really unbelievable, because this is a fantastic value, it's a fantastic device on its own, and now something that costs less and is smaller and everything, to actually be even at the same level, is unbelievable to me, let alone to be slightly more preferable. To actually fully outperform EarMen L-amp, I had to resort to the Geshelli Labs stack of J2S DAC and Irish 3 headphone amplifier. Now this stack goes for about $1,000 if you're in the US. If you're not, if you're in Europe or any other place than US, it will be even more than that. So 2.5 to 3 and even more times pricier stack, but you then actually outperform L-amp by having almost equal liquidity of high frequencies and purity, but with better detail retrieval and with higher dynamics. And that's it, because nothing in between was actually a true upgrade over L-amp, just a bit different tonality or a bit different qualities, meaning that this little thing really rocks. But now it's time to talk about shortcomings, and there are two shortcomings that you have to be okay with if you want to live with L-amp. The first one of them is that because this is a small thin device that utilizes tubes, it's quite microphonic. Not quite, it's very microphonic. So while using it, if you knock on it, or even if you just press this aluminum button on side that has this firm click, you do hear pinging sound in your headphones. And it slowly decays down, but if you knock it a bit harder, that can last up to like half a minute or so. Now it's not super loud sound, but it's noticeable, and for me personally, this makes the EarMen L-amp much more of a desktop device, or portable in a way that, yes, you can put it next to your laptop, you can carry it with you because it's very lightweight, it's very portable. But once you start listening to the music, you should not be meddling and touching it and clicking on it that much. By the way, volume buttons do not control anything that's separate from the operating system. So I suggest controlling the volume using your keyboard, mouse, just any operating system that you're using from the software, because pressing these buttons do the same thing and induce small ping into the sound that lasts some time. And for portability, if you keep it snugly in a soft pocket without anything else, it's okay. If you put it together with something else, like maybe a power bank or your phone, together in the same compartment, and they maybe knock slightly at each other, you'll hear microphonics all the time. But using it as a desktop device, when you are not moving it and knocking at it and meddling with it at all times, this microphony is not a problem. For example, I keep it next to my mechanical keyboard, and even if I type really hard and slam on the keyboard, that does not interfere with the DAC itself. Only you physically touching it directly does. Second shortcoming that we have to talk about is that the output of this device is not perfectly silent. And the degree to which that will be noticeable will heavily depend on the headphones or earphones you use. For example, if I used something like AKG K702, it did appear perfectly silent because there are lower sensitivity headphones. They have a reasonably high impedance, I believe 60 something ohms, so they appear to be silent. With in-ears that are highly sensitive, but also with headphones that are highly sensitive, there is a noticeable background hiss that it's not too distracting, and once the music starts, I do not notice it, I cannot hear it. But when the music is paused and there should be complete silence, you actually always hear a slight background hum that feels like a distant waterfall is somewhere around you. For me personally, this did not present a problem, because once anything starts playing, I could not detect that in the sound anywhere anymore. It did not present itself like muddier sound or worse sound stage or worse background darkness or anything like that. But when you're on the pause, you can hear it with many headphones or earphones. Now, moving this switch to IEM helps. It decreases that, and you can barely hear any background hum. It's not completely gone, but you can barely hear it. And that works great for IEMs. But for some bigger headphones, you do lose on the sound quality, dynamics, and richness of the sound. So I personally preferred keeping this off and just putting up with slight hum. So these two things, microphony and slight background hum, is just something that you have to be okay with. Otherwise, you have to go find something else. But that something else, especially this price, most likely will not sound nowhere near as good as L-amp. So weigh that for yourself. Personally, I would easily live with these two shortcomings when it means that the sound, once it starts playing, is this good. One last thing that I noticed when it comes to pairing, it didn't want to cooperate with Verum headphones. Now, those are quite specific planners that have nominal impedance of 8 ohms, which is the lowest the L-amp is specified at. But I did notice that some independent measurements actually measured Verum headphones to be even lower than 8 ohms. Some people measured 6-point-something ohms, and that presents quite a strain on the headphone amplifier. So with both Verum 1 and Verum 2, it seems that some sort of current protection was kicking in, and the sound would stop and then start again and stop and start again. That only happened with Verums. There was no problem with other planners like hifi or gold planners that are also demanding. They require lots of power, they have low impedances, but like normally low, not 6 tones. So just be aware of that. If you by any chance have Verum 1 or Verum 2 and you want to use this DAC with them, don't, because it's not a good match. Next, if you ask, so what about using it as a DAC only? If I use its line output, not powering any headphones, but just to connect it to my preamp or integrated amplifier and use it as a DAC. So in that case, it works really well. All of the basic qualities that I've described for EarMen L-amp when used as a headphone amplifier and a DAC just translate to it as a DAC. And I'll keep this short so I don't bother you for too long. It performs in the same tier, in the same league with Chord Mojo 2, which is a great DAC. It's actually a better DAC than it's a headphone amp. Or this Rose Technics RT5000 or Geshelli Labs J2S. So it's very comparable in terms of detail retrieval, tonality, and just sound stage, and also dynamics to Geshelli Labs J2S and Rose Technics RT5000, but with a bit more glow and brilliance in its sound. When it's compared to Mojo 2, there's maybe slightly bigger difference because Mojo 2 still sounds warm, and that especially goes for its bass and mid-bass section, lower mid-range too. But starting with the upper mid-range and going into highs, Mojo 2 does feel a bit more matte. It has slightly grainier sound, but that also translates to slightly more textured sound. So inner tone texturing and detailing and just harmonic richness feels slightly better with Mojo 2 than with Geshelli Labs and Rose Technics, and also than this EarMen L-amp. On the other hand, as I said, Mojo 2 sounds a bit more matte, a bit drier. And EarMen L-amp sounds more liquid-like. It has better flow, better radiance in the upper mid-range and higher frequencies. So which one of these you'll prefer will boil down quite a lot to your preferences and the rest of your system and your room. But to bring this review to its conclusion, if you want to use L-amp, you have to be okay with its shortcomings that I mentioned. But once the music starts playing, this DAC sounds so fine, so radiant, so coherent in time. And I'm more and more understanding that group of people that's saying, I don't care how technically excellent something is. If it sounds a bit flat, if it sounds a bit dry or analytical, and I don't enjoy how it sounds, I don't care if that's technical excellence. I'm not sound engineer. I do not need to be insightful into the recording's faults. And that's where L-amp comes into play. Something that sounds so natural, so fluid, so effortless and lifelike. I never heard anything around $400 that sounded like that until now. Once again, you have to be okay with microphony and slight background noise. But I think that pales in comparison to how it actually sounds once it starts playing. And with that, I hope you like this video. See you next time.